Golovkin was fighting this mandatory Kamil Szeremeta. To be honest with you, I don't really understand how this guy became the mandatory. There's so many like good middleweights right now. There's not that many great middleweights, but there's a lot of good middleweights. I'm not saying this guy can't fight, but it just seemed so weird that the IBF would have this fighter as the mandatory to, one of the best fighters pound for pound. But aside from that, to be honest with you, man, Golovkin looked as good as I could remember him looking in a very long time, man. It was very impressive. He dropped him in the first round, the second round, the fourth round, and then the seventh round, which ultimately wound up being the last round. Golovkin stopping him at the end of the seventh. There was like a couple of things he was doing that, he looked like the Golovkin we all remember, but to be honest, I think he sort of added, a couple extra layers to what he does aside from power punching and jabbing. His upper body and his head movement was so much better in this fight than I can remember it being. He was never a bad defensive fighter. He was always relatively responsible defensively, but it was a much more active effort to make this guy miss. And then following that up, he was more fluid with his offense. His offense was much more fluid in this fight. I felt like he was throwing smoother combinations, creating angles off of those combinations. Not everything was a 10. He was throwing sixes and sevens, to keep this guy stationary. And to be honest with you, the Szeremeta actually had some nice glove rolling and some head movement. He was kind of like trying to catch stuff, but he didn't have the offensive tools to give Golovkin a reason to think twice. And so Golovkin was just pounding him with that jab. And that head movement, I think, threw Szeremeta off as well, because he was throwing his jab and he could not land it. He couldn't even touch glove with it. Like he was throwing that jab as straight up nothing. And I think that once you start missing your jab so regularly, it's going to make a lot of guys more hesitant to let go of something else, because the jab is like the rangefinder. It's the punch that's going to set up the other punches. So if you're missing that punch consistently, it's going to throw off your whole offense, And I really love how Triple G took his time, man. He really took his time. I think he could have, like, after the knockdown in the fourth round, I felt like he took his foot off the gas just a little bit, and he probably could have ended it right then. But he didn't, and I think, gave himself a few more rounds to work and show everybody like his full arsenal, his full skill set. Again, beyond just being a power puncher and a destroyer and a knockout guy. Like, this is a guy with some real craft, some real technique, that can make you miss, that can make you pay. And I felt like he also was throwing this counter right uppercut a couple of times it was so fast. And every time he would land it, it would just blast fucking Szeremeta's head straight up. It was a bing, it was like a wake-up shot. I don't remember seeing him throw that punch a lot. So as a whole, I just felt like Golovkin's whole game, everyone is saying that he's on the back end, that he's not the same killer he used to be. But I think in another sense, he's a smarter fighter than he used to be. I think the Canelo fights have sort of forced him in a weird way to add variety to his game. Like, he's much more willing to just put together a little speed combination to set something bigger up, as opposed to just whipping everything, as hard as he possibly can. So I really liked the variety that Triple G had in his game in this fight. And, it's hard to know what he's going to do next. Obviously, a third fight Canelo, I think with Canelo is something that most boxing fans would want to see. And I'll get to that at the end of the fight. But just thinking realistically, he's a middleweight titleist. I don't generally get the sense that his ambitions are to move up in weight. It seems like he's a career middleweight. He's been there his whole career. He doesn't change weight. And so if he's going to stay a middleweight, there's only a handful of fights for him, I would say, that are worth it. And it's the other guys with belts. You got Jamal Charlo. You got Ryota Murata, the guy from Japan. And you got Demetrius Andrade, which to be honest with you, as far as like matchups and who deserves the fight, I would really love to see Golovkin and Andrade. I think that fight ultimately would determine who the best middleweight in the world was. But I think regardless, if his next fight is against any of those guys, it would be very difficult to say that he's not the best middleweight in the world with 2 belts. And maybe him being the established, for sure, #1 middleweight again would create even more like public demand for the third Canelo fight, more marketability, you know, the top of this division versus the top of this division in a third fight. So